This is my pseudo entry for Ludum Dare 43, a maze game where enemies lurk around every corner and sacrifices must be made. Now, hold up, didn't Ludum Dare 43 take place like 2 years ago? Well, that's why I said pseudo entry. You see, back then I was a terrible coder, which meant that in the 2 days that Ludum Dare gives you, I made this. Which just isn't really a game now, is it? I forgot about the project for a while, but I randomly came across it recently and decided, you know what, let's finish this, because I still think the idea is very intriguing. The theme that month was Sacrifices Must Be Made. And when I think of sacrifices, I think of mythology, and when I think of that, I think of the Minotaur and the maze. That's what kinda inspired the whole game. So the player would be stuck in the middle of a maze, the obvious goal being to get out. Now, around the maze there would be many items, for example weapons or food, potions. So useful stuff, mainly considering that there's a bunch of enemies, and also you have a hunger bar that you need to satisfy. The catch is, some of these items you would have to sometimes sacrifice to the gods, using this altar in the middle of the maze. This would force you to sometimes trek back to the middle until you eventually made enough progress to get out. And not sacrificing items wouldn't actually kill the player, instead it would adjust to the game's difficulty. The lower the god's satisfaction, the more enemies there are. So it would be a game of time/resource management and memorization. With this idea in mind, I got into coding. Obviously, I needed something that would generate a maze. There's a lot of algorithms out there for this, and so naturally, past me decided to reinvent the wheel and make his own one. What you're seeing here is an example of how it carves out the maze, and you may have noticed an obvious issue, which is that it doesn't always fill out the whole maze. But back then I said, that's a feature, not a bug. It makes the maze feel more natural. So, moving on. Really, it's now just a matter of scaling it up and adding collisions, and well, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, I basically spent the entirety of 2 days making this, so. But on that note, maybe I should talk a bit about the structure of the maze. So first of all, it's not just corridors, there's these smaller rooms that items usually spawn in. Okay, let's talk about the general structure. In the middle, there's the golden room. This is where you make your sacrifices. Surrounding it is maze and then a wall, and depending on the size of the maze there may be another wall surrounding that. Only once you get past these walls do you get to the actual perimeter of the maze. Now each of these walls, and also the maze itself, has 2 exits. A north exit and a south exit. The maze exits are literally just holes in the wall, but the inner wall exits, those are doors, and you need a key to open them. The generation makes sure that there's at least 2 keys in every walled off area, so unless you go around sacrificing keys, you should be okay. Anyway, that's that. Back to the game. Pretty soon I got bored of black and white squares, so let's do some texturing, and oh my gosh, what is that? Not satisfied with the textures, I started over, thank gosh, and got a better look to the game. Although I would eventually change it a bit later, because making detailed items on a 16x16 tile is kinda difficult. Quick side note, the chests are only placeholders because I hadn't really started working on items yet, so. Anyway, you may think that this maze still looks kinda boring compared to what I showed in the intro, and you are correct. Mostly it's because of the red rectangle player, but it's also because the game is missing the lighting system. This was just a ray tracing thing which I made a demo of, and because it worked so well, I implemented it into the game. It's not that complicated, it just makes lines from every path tile to the player, and if that line goes through a wall, the path tile is made dark. And the wall tiles around a path tile are lit based on the lighting of the path, if that makes sense. After a bit more texturing, the game now looks quite good. The next important step was the inventory, because, you know, you need somewhere to put all the items. It's ridiculously simple. There's only 3 slots, and you can't even move items around. I would like to say that this is also a feature, but it's genuinely just me being too lazy and deeming it an unnecessary addition. Though, to be fair, for quite a while the player couldn't even drop items. which was something I later added because of strategy reasons. You can, for example, mark a path with items, or bring a large stash close to the golden room for sacrifices. The system is highly customizable. All I need to do to add a new item is draw it, give it a nutrition or damage value, and a spawn chance. That's it, no extra fuss. Although the code is kinda scary. It theoretically supports up to 100 items made this way, although I didn't quite make the texture map correctly, so we could probably do around 30. But, you know, that's still quite a bit. Just as a smaller random addition, I made these fancy spikes which spawn all around the place and damage you when you stand on them. I also added the UI, which brings us to a really crucial part of the game, the God Satisfaction meter. This is kind of the bar which tells you when you need to sacrifice something, and obviously it goes up when you do. There's a bit of math which went into it, which makes it affect the enemy spawn rates, and also the difficulty of the spawned enemies. So that's pretty cool. Except we don't have any enemies yet, but that's because our poor player has nothing to defend himself with. So let's add weapons first. Drawing them wasn't much of a hassle, but they kinda required an animation, because, you know, a sword doesn't do damage by just standing there. The thing is, I don't really know how to animate stuff in pixel art, so here's this fancy spinny effect, which actually doesn't look too bad, to be honest. So, enemies now. Here's a bat. I know he looks a bit ugly, but we'll get to texturing soon. And he's kinda stupid. That's because originally I made a custom pathfinding algorithm, which absolutely did not work, and it was just terrible in general. And I kept redoing it, and it still didn't work. Point is, enemies now can spawn on dark squares, and you can attack them, and they can attack you, which is nice. And that's basically the state that I left the game in for over a year. When I came back to it a few weeks ago, the first thing I did was the full retexture, which was basically just scaling up the 16 by 16 tiles to 24 by 24 tiles, not changing the style too much. It ended up looking quite decent. Maybe a bit too pristine, but let's say that that's by design. I also added a bunch more items and a new enemy, the rat. And then I played around with menus, which I finally seem to have figured out, and they no longer take me months to finish. Then I looked at the AI and said, you know what, frack this, I'm gonna redo them again, which was, in a way, a great idea, but in another way, a terrible idea. First of all, I made the player slow down when going around enemies, which makes combat slightly more interesting. Now, here's the thing. I actually studied how you're supposed to do pathfinding, and I managed to implement the A-star pathfinding algorithm after creating a quick demo. This means circling around the room is no longer effective. While I was immensely proud, the fundamental system on which the AI was built is still kind of broken, and while it doesn't necessarily affect the gameplay experience when you don't mess around too much, it still annoys me deep in my soul. Simply said, mice sometimes go through walls, but let's just act like it's okay. I mean, that's basically it for the devlog. I did some stuff to make sacrifices look cool, and I made some other minor tweaks like this arrow which always points to the center of the maze. The game ended up having a whopping 14 items and 3 enemies. Not much, but it's enough to make it fun for quite a bit. Actually, frankly, this is the first game I made that I really enjoyed playing, even after having developed it for a while. To end stuff off, I also spent about a day making music and sound effects, but there's nothing really special about those, to be honest. So yeah, if you enjoy this idea and if you want to play it, it's on itch.io. I also have this very fancy clone of Ludum Dare, which I actually made a video about previously, so you can check that out if you want. Yeah, thanks for watching, subscribe, comment and like if you want, and I'll just leave you with some more gameplay footage. See you next time.